Got my first internet troll yesterday, and I was like,
Oh, no.
This is something that I'm going to need to get used to, that I want to handle in a healthy way where I don't just shut down.
But when you can live in this place of this healthy adult self, where you're like, okay, I know what's going on here. I am good enough. I don't need troll person to decide my value or worth.
There's a temptation to judge how something is performing or not performing as a ding on my worth, especially because it's not just the performance of something I've created, it also has my face on it.
Hey everyone, it's Mike Foster. Welcome to the Primal Question podcast, a podcast that is about exploring the roots of our lives versus the branches. We're looking at the thing underneath the thing that drives everything. And so glad you're with us today. We have a great guest with us where we're going to explore the primal question of, am I good enough? And I want you to welcome my guest, Laura. Laura, good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thanks so much for having me.
Well, I am so excited to talk to you about your primal question, because the question of, am I good enough, around value and worth, and really the struggle of just feeling sometimes like we're flawed, or there's something that's not good within us, and how we wrestle with that in our lives. Talk to me about how you have seen that question of, am I good enough, in your own life?
Yeah, I would say honestly in conflict and in the scrambles where it shows up the most. And I think I see, looking back, this thread of people pleasing, of feeling like I need to prove something, of even a little bit of underlying anxiety before I really started diving into the primal question and realizing, yes, I am good enough. I realized that was a little bit of an underlying current through everything, whether it was school or a job or relationships, just trying to prove that like I'm worth being here. I'm good enough to be an employee, to be your friend, to be your girlfriend, whatever it is. I can see that there's just a thread of something, through all the different pieces of my life.
How do you think, so we talk a lot about the imprint and the power of our early childhood experiences, of how they have a lot of impact on how we see ourselves, how we see the world, how we see worth and value. How did that question of, am I good enough, get imprinted? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I don't think there was necessarily like one big event. Like there was no traumatic event that necessarily was a clear like, oh, it definitely led to this. But looking back from when I was a kid, I see how I often found myself in the middle of tense relationships, whether it was in families or in friendships. I found myself being the mediator, being the one to kind of keep things together or make sure everything was smooth. And I think I found a lot of value in that. I was praised for that. I was the glue in a lot of friendships, but I think it made me feel like I had to be that in order to be worth something, because it was actually something I got praised for, being easygoing, for being easy to get along with, for being go with the flow. So I found a lot of value in being whoever people needed me to be.
So you felt like it's almost like you were a human doing versus a human being, that your value and worth, attention, love, connection, praise, affirmation, all came when you were doing something good or helpful.
Yes.
How does that show up today as you think about like that? Yeah, I'm sure just wrestling with that. Can I just be me? Is that good enough? Versus me who's performing, doing, creating, value. Talk to me like how that plays out talk to me how that plays out in your marriage. I know you're married to Ryan. Talk to me like how that idea plays out in that relationship.
Yeah, I am very thankful to be married to someone who really wants the honest me, who really draws out all of me and can sense when I'm starting to perform, go back into people-pleasing tendencies, withdrawing a little bit. He sees all these defense mechanisms and he will call it out and doesn't let me stay there, which is helpful at first. Well, still is uncomfortable. It doesn't really get less more comfortable, I guess. But it's been really helpful to have a container where I can just be myself, and that is actually celebrated. When I'm having a hard time, but I'm honest about it, that's really celebrated in our marriage. So that's really helped me
absolutely
lean into being okay with who I am and realizing me having flaws is part of what makes me good enough.
Absolutely. It's interesting, the with this particular question, the just the scramble of performing, of just always being on, always feeling like your worth is being judged at work and in marriage, parenting, all the different domains, friends, whatever, society at large. It's always this pressure to make sure that we're doing it right. And when we come into an environment or a relationship where you no longer have to do that and just be accepted as you are, that must feel pretty amazing.
It does.
What does it feel like for you to just be fully accepted and to really have that primal question answered with a big yes?
Yeah, it felt very raw at first, very exposing almost. I just wasn't that practiced in being myself to that level, I realized. And of course, all this is, unconscious. So I was not trying to protect myself. I wasn't trying to people please. It was just an automatic habit that I didn't realize I was doing to that level until I had someone who wouldn't let me do it anymore. So it felt really raw and uncomfortable at first. He was willing to sit with me for as long as he needed to for me to say what was on my mind, which I know is hard for him because he's an external processor. He's ready to go. He wants to work through things. I'm an internal processor. I can withdraw during conflict. And so he was willing to sit there until whatever came to the surface that I really did want to talk about. So it took a while, honestly, the first year or so of our relationship when we were dating. Conflict was difficult and he was very, very patient. So at least he grew in patience during that year. And it feels amazing now. It's still practice, but I'm much better at more quickly saying, oh, this is actually how I'm feeling and it's okay. And I don't have to say, here's how I'm feeling, but here's what I'm doing to fix it, or here's the solution for that. I can just say, this is how I'm feeling, or this is what I'm struggling with. And it's okay. It's actually celebrated. So even as I talk about it, I feel my shoulders relaxing. Like it feels relaxing.
Yeah. Because it is when you're always in this kind of this expectation to perform or be good or be acceptable, there's just a weight that you carry in life with that. And sometimes it feels like 1,000 tons on your back when you're trying to get people to see your value and affirm you. But it's, these are the strongest relationships we'll have are the ones with people who gladly answer our primal question with a yes, and we don't have to go to that performance mode. So when we talk about the scramble is all the ways that we try to force the answer to a yes. It's really our way of taking control of that deep need that we have for our question Q6, which would be value and worth. What is your kind of number one go-to in your scramble in terms of trying to force it to a yes? Like, what is the thing that, let's say I shake your snow globe, you get a big no to your primal question. What is Laura doing to fight to get that back to a yes?
Most of the time it looks like apologizing and then doubling down on performing. Ooh. I can tell I'm going into a scramble if I apologize for someone and the person looks confused about what I'm apologizing for.
Okay, so tell me more about that. Why is the instant response to apologize?
I think it's because I feel like there's something wrong with me. And when I start to take things really personally, when I start to get really sensitive to criticism, I can tell I'm in a scramble. I can tell, I'm taking this too personally and it's probably not about me. So, with Ryan and I for a while working together, owning a business together, there were plenty of opportunities for me to go into a scramble because business, like most things in life, doesn't always go the way that you want it to. So if something wasn't going well, or say a campaign I was working on wasn't working the way that we thought that it would, it was really easy for me to just, when Ryan and I were talking about it too, apologize for it and then say, but I'm going to do this, this, and this. And a marketing campaign not going well is not a reason to apologize. There's nothing wrong with me as a person.
So you personalize things. If something is going wrong, whatever might be going wrong, or if somebody's unhappy or a project isn't turning out the way, there's a personalization of it saying there's something wrong with me. Thus,
It's
I
like
need to apologize for myself.
yes. Yeah. When I get the look like, what are you apologizing for? I'm like, I just feel like I need to. Like, I just need to prove that I'm going to do better next time. When it's not even really about me doing better. It's like instead of we're coming together to solve the problem of this campaign or whatever the issue is, I feel like we're solving me or fixing me when that's not the case.
So, yeah, I wonder, these patterns that we choose as adults to kind of force our question back to a yes, and so apologizing, and then the second half of that being the high performance, going into that. Usually these patterns are learned earlier on in our lives. Did you find that maybe even as a child you were kind of always apologizing for yourself? Like that was a go-to for you?
Oh yeah, always. It's difficult to unlearn because this is, decades long habits.
Talk to me about that. Like what in your childhood, what response did you get from parents or people or adults that said like you need to apologize because that's how I can show my worth?
What's interesting is my parents didn't know what I was apologizing for either. They joked and called me the self-punishing child. There were a few times where I would send myself to my room and say, okay, I guess I'm in trouble. I didn't want to be. I was almost never sent to my room, but there was something in me that felt like there was something wrong with me if I did something wrong and I was punished for it, even though they weren't overly strict. And they were sensitive because they could tell I was like that, from pretty young. And so I'd say, no, it's okay. You don't have to punish me. I'm just going to go to my room myself. And they still laugh about it. They're like, we weren't even going to send you to your room. We're not even sure why you did that. So there was just something internal that just wanted to protect and say, it's okay. I see my flaws and I'm going to go take care of it by myself.
Oh, that's a big, you think about the concept of punishment, that even as a child, you're thinking, I deserve the punishment and I'll self-punish myself.
Yeah.
What would you say to that little Laura who's thinking that was thinking that back in the day to help her sort of understand that maybe she didn't need to punish herself? Like what would you say to her? What should she have done differently?
I feel a lot of tenderness for her. I would tell her it's okay to mess up. It doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you. You're a kid. Kids make mistakes. Adults make mistakes. Doesn't mean it has anything to do with you. Doing something wrong doesn't mean that you are wrong.
Imagine like those words that you would say to your younger self are probably words that you need to even hear today and remind yourself of.
It feels therapeutic even right now.
Yeah, because it's very true. Like our the messages and the things that we needed to hear as a kid. And again, this is not about like blaming our parents or blaming anything, but just understanding that these needs that we had as a growing up and as a child that were in our formative years are still true today, even though we're adults and we're much more capable and smart and strategic and we have better resources, all that kind of stuff. It's still true that what we needed back then is still what we need today. And to embrace that. There's nothing wrong with that. There's, strategic people are growing, people who are leveling up in their lives, embrace the things that actually are helpful. So telling yourself that, hey, I don't need to personalize this. It's okay. Have more compassion on Laura, have more grace towards Laura. We all make mistakes. Those messages you need to hear as a little girl, but they're still true today.
Yeah.
Talk to me about, is there something going on right now, maybe this week, where that primal question of, am I good enough, is perhaps rattling a little bit, that you're still trying to process and kind of get your mind around?
There is. So I have been in business and doing marketing for other people for quite some time, probably a decade or so. And I am starting a new business as of, the last couple of months.
Yes.
And there are plenty of opportunities for my primal question to get rattled. It's something that's born like out of the desire of my heart. It's my face. I'm not doing it for someone else. I'm doing it for me. And so I'm putting myself out there in a new way. And there's a temptation to judge how something is performing or not performing as, a ding on my worth, especially because it's not just the performance of something I've created. It also has my face on it and was, born out of me. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of opportunities right now.
Yeah, because you are really putting yourself out there.
Yeah.
And really the kryptonite for this particular question is, hey friend, you and I have a hidden force driving our lives. It drives our choices, our behaviors, our triggers, our relationships, and even our strengths and our gifts. And most of us have no idea what it is or how to control it. And this hidden force is an unmet emotional need. There are 7 of them, and I call them the 7 primal questions. And when you don't know your primal question, it can wreak havoc on your life. Because people will do whatever it takes to meet this need. And we can even try to meet that need in some pretty unhealthy ways. But when you identify your core emotional need, a lot of things begin to make sense. And you'll have the clarity to meet emotional needs for yourself and others in much healthier ways that have far-reaching effects on your life and your relationships. Take 5 minutes to discover your primal question today at primalquestion.com. The kryptonite for this particular question is judgment and criticism. Mm-hmm. And so anytime you're creating something, you're pouring yourself into this, it's your ideas, your concepts, and then you're putting it out into the world. You really are just opening yourself up for that question to be answered one way or the other. Mm-hmm. That feels like quite a risk.
It feels exposing. I got my first internet troll yesterday, and I was like, Ryan, I'm going to celebrate it because I know that this means someone's seeing it, at least because it happens. So it's like, I'm going to take this as a win. But it was a good reminder that, okay, if I'm exposing myself in this way, these are the types of comments I will be seeing. Mm-hmm. I can shut myself off to all that and protect myself, which means I don't pursue the dream that I have. Mm-hmm. So this is something that I'm going to need to get used to, that I want to handle in a healthy way where I don't just shut down from it, but it's not something that gets me, wound up for the rest of the day because someone on the internet who's not a good fit for what I do has something to say about whatever I posted about that day.
Laura, I mean, that's such a, that's just so awesome that you are responding to that way. Like you're really stepping up into that, activation around your question where an internet troll doesn't really matter, by the way, who it is, whether we know them or don't know them, it still can be very activating to the question of, am I good enough?
Yeah.
And for you to kind of show up in that way and be such a great coach to yourself, to remind yourself of truth, remind yourself of what the stakes are here. Am I going to listen to the troll or am I going to listen to my heart and what I believe will help people and my ideas? I mean, that is really so much of what we talk about in the book and in the work that we do is this whole idea of building resilience. So when we get those no's, we don't have to instantly go into the scramble. And what you're describing there is really you practicing this self-leadership and this inner emotional strength to stay in that place of truth. Mm-hmm. Good job.
Thank you. Thank you. It's a practice, definitely not done perfectly by any means, but it was something that made me realize, okay, this is going to be a really good opportunity for me to keep developing in this, because why pursue this dream only to be emotionally taken out every single day by things like this as I grow? That's not going to be worth it. So this is something I want to learn how to, lean into on a new level.
Yeah. It's so practical too, because it's like, we have a vision for our life. We have passions. We want to create things. We want to help people. And we are either going to live our lives kind of leading out and coaching ourselves well, understanding what's going on deep inside of us, understanding why we have these triggers and the scramble. And we can sort of live at the mercy of that and allow that to control our lives and our relationships and our marriage and all of it. And unfortunately, if we choose that, it's not much of a life. It really isn't. It's an exhausting life. And I've lived there. You've lived there. When we're living in this place of just our scramble, it is, it doesn't produce much. But when you can live in this place of this healthy adult self, where you're like, okay, I know what's going on here. I know why this troll's comments, as ridiculous as they are, right? And as like, I don't know this troll doesn't know me. But for you to show up in that and just say, okay, I got this. I can answer my own primal question with a yes. I am good enough. I don't need troll person to decide my value or worth.
Yeah.
Now talk to me about what it's like when somebody close to you, somebody you know, somebody you actually care about has a critique. How does that feel? And what do you do then?
Oh, that's tough. That one's really tough. And I think a lot of the times it can be unintentional, which makes it difficult too, especially being a little bit more sensitive to criticism. I think people can sometimes say something offhand that they don't mean as a criticism, but I can maybe take that way. It's difficult not to just show up and say, okay, I'm not going to talk about that anymore. Like business is one of those things that might be something where there's people in my life that don't necessarily understand the desires of my heart, and that's okay. But I can go into this place where I'm like, okay, if they didn't quite understand it, I'm just maybe not going to tell them about it anymore, which is not necessarily a healthy place. But I am finding the balance of that where I don't need to share everything with everyone, and that's also okay. So still finding the balance of what do I do when, I share something or receive some feedback that feels like it's making me go into a scramble when shutting down is my main response. So still working on that one.
Can you think of a recent comment? And it could be, again, we don't have to name any names, or we're not throwing anybody under the bus, because to your point, especially typically with our friends or people who care about us, it's unintentional. But can you think about maybe a comment, or somebody said something, or maybe had a question about this new project, like whether you were, I don't know, capable of doing it, or if this was a good idea? Do you remember what the words were?
Sometimes no response feels almost worse than a response. And I had a situation where I was sharing, like, I'm really excited. I'm starting this new business. And I got sort of like, that's nice. And then we started talking about something else, like no follow-up questions. Like that almost felt worse. Like I don't care about what you're doing, which is probably not true. They maybe didn't know what to ask, but it felt almost dismissive. So that was almost harder for me than any questions about it, because it felt like a lack of care for something that felt vulnerable for me to even share that I was doing in the first place.
So they just failed to lean in. There was part of that, the question 6 of am I good enough? The thing that feels so good to a Q6 is affirmation and encouragement. And so here you are putting yourself out to somebody, and they're kind of like ho-humming and like, oh, interesting. There's no encouragement. There's no affirmation. There's no follow-up questions. Tell me more. The interest, the leaning in, that can feel as activating as the troll on the internet.
Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, it is. And it's, one of the things I love about the model of Primal Question is just, we now can understand what's going on inside of us. That's my whole goal of like the book and everything that we talk about, is the empowerment around our need, kind of that deep core need. And again, value and worth is what I would call your apex emotional need. It's the most important. You have other needs, obviously, and those are important too. But when you get that clarity around that core need, that really can undermine your life and undermine your relationships and undermine your business if you're not managing that well. It's so helpful to understand it. Do you feel like as you're going along, you're aware of your question, you're aware of the core need that you have around value and worth and feeling good enough, how are you like getting, are you getting clearer about all the different implications of it in ways that you didn't even think this would play out?
Absolutely. It feels so freeing, to your point of a few minutes ago when you talked about how we can just be carrying around this 1,000-ton weight all the time. When you carry something like that around for years or decades even, you don't even necessarily realize you're carrying it until you start to unload it and you're like, oh, I actually feel freer and lighter, and I didn't
Yes.
realize I was carrying something so heavy. That's how it's felt. And yeah, it feels so freeing. It feels like I'm able to understand things a little better. I remember even growing up with the people pleasing, I was aware I was doing it, but what felt isolating is it didn't feel like everyone else was doing it, which added to the, is there something
Yes.
wrong with me? I'm like, why does it feel like I'm the I am the only one who's always trying to perform, who's trying to keep everything together? Why does everyone else seem like they're just so free to be themselves? So that really added onto the whole, is there something wrong with me? So understanding, oh, this is just how some of us are. And there's other Q6s out there. I love meeting it. I'm like, you're a Q6. We're not flawed. Isn't that
Yes.
great? There's something freeing in that. And I just realized there's not, I am wired differently than other people, and that's okay too.
Absolutely. And embrace that. And it doesn't mean there's anything wrong with you. And that's a really important message for a Q6 to understand that they're not flawed. They're not the outsider. They're not the, only one.
Yeah.
And to really, in a sense, normalize the need that you have, because millions of people have that need too. What would you say, like just in our final moments here, there are lots of Q6s listening right now, lots of people. It's one of the most common primal questions that I come across in my work is the question of, am I good enough? What would you say to other Q6s that you perhaps have learned about this question, and either some helpful things, some encouraging things that you might say to people who are sitting out there going, am I good enough?
I would say to keep creating and keep doing the things that are on your heart. I think part of why we're sensitive to criticism is because we have something unique to bring, and it feels, it's vulnerable because it is different, and it's always vulnerable bringing something new to life or doing something in a way that's maybe different than how other people have done it before. And I firmly believe that that's why the world needs that thing. So I think the more we can lean into answering our own primal question with a yes, being okay with who we are, realizing I am good enough, then we just get to create from a place of freedom, because we're going to do it anyways. We can do it with a lot of pain, or we can do it feeling free. So we might as well keep creating and do it in a way where we're feeling free.
Love that. Keep creating, keep putting yourself out there, follow your heart and your passions, and pay no attention to the trolls online. And whether they're online, at your workplace, in your family, wherever those trolls who want to give you that 1-star review, whatever, just don't listen to them, and know that your worth and value just flows from who you are, and create from that place of worth and value, and not insecurity or perfectionism or performance. Just be who you are.
Yeah.
I love that, Laura. Thank you so much for just sharing your story with us. Man, it's just so helpful. I feel like I learned so much from you about just how this question plays out, and kind of the nuts and bolts of the question, am I good enough? So thanks for sharing today.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks for creating this. It's been such a helpful framework. So I really appreciate it. And it's been a lot of fun.
Yes, it has. And with that, we'll call it a day. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode of the Primal Question podcast. I hope you've learned something new about your primal question, or maybe the primal question of someone you know. If you think this episode would be helpful to a friend, I encourage you, please share it. Let people know about the podcast and how it's impacted you by sending a link to a friend. If you're ready to take the next step in your own self-discovery journey, I invite you to visit primalquestion.com/podcast. That's primalquestion.com/podcast for additional free resources and to explore the opportunity to work one-on-one with a Primal Question coach. Also, for those of you who feel a calling to guide others on their journey, there's information available about how you can become a certified Primal Question coach yourself. It's a powerful way to transform lives, including your own.